Hello everybody. Today I am going to be reviewing The Batman, and this film was directed by Matt Reeves. I wasn't really sitting here thinking, gosh, if there's one story that has to be told again, it's the story of Batman, but we have it anyway. So this is the newest interpretation of Batman, or The Batman in this case. Of course, it's something people like, but it's also an excuse, I think, to project a lot of social and political frustrations that we experience in the present onto something as timeless as Batman, something that is so legendary in terms of mythos. And there's certainly a consistent tone in this film that has to do with a lot of that. You really do feel the weight of like this brooding kind of dread, and certainly a very muddled moral code as well. This is a film that is making a commentary on all kinds of things, certainly class structure and the corruptness of our institutions, and certainly the corruptness of our politicians, our leaders, and kind of the circumstances for each individual and how that kind of builds us. And I think all of these threads are tied together by one sort of singular concept that, exists in Batman very strongly, and that is guilt. The guilt of a man who has literally everything at his disposal, basically. And I always thought that, Batman, he's a character that is very hard to interpret well. I actually don't think anybody has quite gotten it right just yet, because he is such an anti-hero that is so kind of between black and white. But they did give it another whirl here, of course. And I think overall, this film, just in terms of just like the mood and the aesthetic and everything, this is perhaps the closest to kind of what I see as the ideal live-action version of Batman. I know a lot of people think that it is more like the Chris Nolan films, and I've talked so many times on this channel about that. I struggle personally with the Christopher Nolan films. They've always left something to be desired, just for me personally. They're extraordinarily well made, don't get me wrong, but they're just very cluttered and clunky, and there is kind of a very sleek, cold, and glossy feel to it that I feel just kind of drains a lot of the personality and the poetry out of this amazing world that is Batman. Yes, there is like a lot of darkness and tragedy, certainly, to Batman, and that's very, very important, capturing that angst and everything, but there's also a major sense of color and theatricality, and it's often very tongue-in-cheek. And I think that with a movie like this, it allows for more of those facets to be opened up. And with Batman, for me, I think most people would agree, one of the great strengths of it is the rogues gallery. And I think that when you have, a director like Christopher Nolan, who is more, he's more meta commentary, he's more auteur, and he's often, stripping down all of his movie elements to just really basic fundamentals of structure. And that doesn't quite come to fruition in a world like this, or rooted in a world like Batman. And again, I know this is just my opinion. I know I'm in the minority. I think what Nolan series has over this is just an extraordinary sense of scope. This film looks very expensive, and it has a real cinematic quality to it that I enjoyed, but Christopher Nolan, I think, is kind of on another level there. He knows how to create a real statement, I think, just with very powerful action set pieces, very minimal CGI. And that effect, particularly in movies like The Dark Knight, as an example, I think that's what really resonates with people. Just this constant feeling of relentless momentum, even if, there is maybe a lack of true world building and true aesthetic. Say what you will, but I look at kind of Gotham in The Dark Knight as an example, and it's basically just Chicago. But I think the heart of Batman, in terms of what I really gain from it, is I really like a classic neo-noir story. I look at Batman the Animated Series, which I talk about a lot. That's, my favorite probably incarnation of Batman in pop culture, because it felt very much like a pastiche of very kind of golden age Hollywood. And when I was a teenager and I started getting really into David Fincher films, I would watch films like Seven and films like Zodiac, those real procedural mystery thrillers. And I thought to myself, this is what I want. I want a Batman that is directed by David Fincher. What more could you want? It's very classical in style, very much inspired by noir and Hitchcock, but yet it is still modern. Yet it's also very rich and has a lush sense of composition. Each frame looks like a manga, like a comic book strip, and there is a real sense of movement. But I think it's more cerebral in nature, and I think Fincher is just more cerebral in nature. And so naturally, this film filled in a lot of those spaces that felt maybe a little bit too skeletal for me in the past. And I wasn't looking forward to seeing this movie, and yet I found myself pleasantly surprised by how much I did enjoy the film. It's certainly not perfect. It's very messy, and it is definitely too long. And there's a lot of plot elements here that are very silly. And the plot does feel like it becomes more and more reductive, just conceptually as it goes. And it doesn't really open itself up to real boldness and darkness in the way that I think it needed to. But yet, just as it stands, it is just a very good, very solid kind of pulpy blockbuster. And yes, it is absolutely going for imitation Fincher for sure. Certainly not on his level of craft or anything like that, but really beat for beat, very classic neo-noir in the style of Seven for sure. Like, the Riddler here, played by Paul Dano, is basically, John Doe, Kevin Spacey. Though the intricacies of the clues and the plotting in that film are a lot stronger and more well thought out than this film. This film also, I think, as beautiful as it is and aesthetically, it's very engaging. I think it's maybe a little bit too dim, a little bit too murky, so I lose a little bit of that contrast. But there are also some really, really great set pieces. I really like the club as an example. There is a very cool chase sequence kind of in the middle of the movie. I wish there had been maybe a little bit more kind of spatial awareness in that sequence. Maybe it is because, watching like films like The Dark Knight, there's just an incredible sense of spatial awareness that Christopher Nolan has. But yeah, I mean, the things that I did like, I found myself really liking, and I enjoyed, like I said, a lot of individual scenes and individual characters and elements of the film a lot. I just wish that it added up to something, overall that I could really appreciate. I want it to be more of just like a well-rounded, satisfying experience, but I do think that it is worth your time nonetheless. For me, I have always wanted to see what they could do with the allegory that is in Batman: Mask of the Phantasm. That's a film that is, it came from the animated series and it came out in the early 90s. And I think that's kind of like the perfect film that really, allows us to see a different side of Bruce Wayne and Batman and that whole persona. And I think it also tests Batman the most just in terms of his true vulnerability, his true feelings. But they still went for the idea of that is all framed in a mob storyline. And so you have a lot of different mysteries here and a lot of different clues that you're looking for throughout the movie, just like Phantasm and just like a lot of procedural Fincher films. But you have the idea, all the pieces are set in place, no pun intended. Pattinson as Batman, I didn't mind so much. I actually liked that he played it a little bit more intimate. I actually kind of like that there is very little difference between the persona of Batman and who Bruce Wayne really is. Normally, we see the playboy, billionaire, philanthropist guy, more a cartoon, as if he's trying to hide, what he really wants to do as a masked vigilante. But here there's more an invisibility to it, and I think that speaks a lot to, just the melancholia of the time and just how much is being exposed these days. Doesn't leave a lot of room for smoke and mirrors, especially of the elites. But I think that's important here to have that because there is a huge struggle here in this movie for the identity of Batman or Bruce Wayne, whatever. He's certainly very lost, whether his mask is on or off. I like that the imagery always has this feeling of pressing darkness that is always testing the Batman for sure. There is a really cool shot that I loved, and it's like in a hallway and it's dark, and he's only really made visible by the light of the guns as they go off. And all of that is just really, really cool as he inches closer and closer. Just a really nice sense of artistry there, I think. I liked Selina Kyle a lot here, and I found it kind of refreshing compared to the last Catwoman that I saw, which was Anne Hathaway, and I think it was The Dark Knight Rises. And I think Zoe Kravitz, who's playing Selina here, Catwoman, I think the reason she works is because it's all very innate. She's inherently sexy, inherently has a sort of independence to her, and a natural spunk, I think. Whereas Anne Hathaway, I think, she's more elegant, she's always come off to me more as like a princess type. Any sort of sexiness would have to be something that she puts on. All of it has to be just naturally within the body. Whenever Anne Hathaway is trying to slink around kind of like a snake, it feels very much like she's told to do it. And I think Zoe is just much more effortless in that. I always thought that people like Michelle Pfeiffer, they have the natural allure of a Selina Kyle that is necessary. I always thought, if a version of Batman existed in like the 30s or the 40s, it would have to be Lauren Bacall could play Selina Kyle. I really like that they got John Turturro for the film. I just love him. I think he's wonderful. I think most people do, and Sarsgaard as well. It's been a while since I've seen him, and I think he's just such an underappreciated actor. And the reason why is because he has such invisible technique, that yet he can play such a wide range of characters. I mean, honestly, those two I think might be, some of the better performances in the film for me. Colin Farrell was very interesting. I did not recognize him at all. And I really found Andy Serkis to be quite endearing and a really great Alfred. So you've got always throughout, especially in the Test Allies and Enemies period, you've got just all these colorful characters that are just punctuating the film throughout. So it makes it hard to ever be really, really bored. And yet the film is nearly 3 hours long. And I'm sorry, but it just felt way too long, and it felt like it definitely wore out its welcome. And I think all of these converging plot threads, they're supposed to build to this big climax, and yet I feel like it didn't really amount to much ultimately. The whole point is they're puzzles, and all these symbols are slowly revealing themselves, but once they're revealed, the plot suddenly looks very silly and less credible. And then all of these things that are being questioned throughout the movie, especially these ideas of struggling between good and evil and all of that, and how murky that can be, it starts to become more and more simplified as it progresses. The thrill in the darkness should really be building to that third act, and yet for me, there is a lack of risk in that. Honestly, it's really in the second half I felt there was a big lack of risk, especially for the main character, and we really need a powerful, a punchy sort of antagonistic force here. And I think we needed our protagonist, Batman, like I said, to be tested in much bigger ways. I think it would at least make the runtime feel more warranted if there was just more risk and more emotional resonance there. The Riddler and the way that he is approached, I think, is a very cool idea. Like I said, they were going more for like a John Doe, Kevin Spacey slow reveal sort of thing. And again, I wanted all of that because it's serious, but it also has a pulpy quality to it, but it is ultimately quite tragic. And I'm really drawn to the Riddler just as a character. I always have been, and I'm really drawn to the way that he's handled here as well. But once it's revealed, for me, I don't want to say that it collapsed on itself, because it didn't. I don't think that this film failed to any strong degree like that, but it sort of just sits there. And again, it's not really growing. It's not really taking us anywhere. We're really just kind of sustaining a certain type of mood at a certain point, and it fails to really make a full impression and really stick the landing. And I actually do have some issues with Paul Dano at times as an actor, and I think partially it's because of just his look. I think he's naturally going to be typecast. He's also played some very famous characters that are slimy and mousy and awkward and eccentric. So he's this, he's naturally, he looks the part, and he's good at playing those parts. But I feel like at times his acting ability almost feels like it's limiting because of how often he is typecast in that role, because he's often reduced to just kind of like this mad, like mumbling character that feels more like a hindrance than a threat. And here, I don't know, I feel like I would have to see it again to really, explain everything. This is a very impromptu review of it, but I felt like it really put the cap on things for me. I have my issues, certainly, with The Dark Knight, but one thing that film has in spades is a proper antagonistic force. And that force, of course, Heath Ledger as the Joker, is so strong that it leaves almost a lot of the rest of the film in the dust. I think it's so bold that they went in that direction. And, Heath Ledger just rips through the film like a freight train. There is no stopping him, and there's that feeling of edge and momentum and darkness, like you could just let go of a person and they fall off a building. And that really needed to exist here. That pathos was very important for the Batman. The necessity to really plunge into dark places that it keeps teasing us with. The Dark Knight, for all its flaws, is saved for me because of its choice to really probe the anarchy and play things very close to the chest in those sections. There is a relentless grit I get in like the interrogation scene between the Joker and Batman in The Dark Knight, compared to, there is a very, very similar interrogation scene between Batman and the Riddler here. But this one, for me, really highlighted all that was missing for me. Because as the cinematic feel of everything and the dread is starting to dwindle for me, my interest in, seeing how the Batman is going to have to confront his morals through the Riddler becomes less and less interesting to me. I love that in The Dark Knight, the Joker corners Batman to such a degree that he has no choice. He can't run anywhere. He is all out of options, and all the Joker can do is laugh in his face. He uses his own games against him because he is smarter than him. And I'm not saying that I want the Riddler to be exactly that, but there is something very engaging about that and very important to the gravitas. In The Dark Knight, Batman really doesn't have much of an arc, at least a traditional arc, and that's part of my issues with it. And yet, just in that one scene, his vulnerability is on the chopping block in a way that I never felt in the Batman. Batman is such a conundrum as a character, and I really struggle with him because he's somebody who is, I think, full of hypocrisy and full of a certain fear. He is often limited by his own sense of guilt and his own, privilege. He has certainly experienced absolute tragedy, but he's never really been exposed to the true horrors of the world, where it really starts to turn him into an antagonist. He only gets a taste of them before he gets to kind of fall back on the cushion of wealth and status. And by choice, he doesn't kill, I think partially because he hasn't been pushed to the brink of anything. I think he's really desperate to prove himself, that he's morally sound, certainly publicly with the philanthropy and all that, but I think definitely more than anything, he's just trying to prove it to himself. He, in a way, is almost like the ultimate virtue signaler, if that's a word. But yeah, always existing in that weird middle area, and I think you've got to really yank him out of that. Whereas the villains have been pushed to the brink. They know what it means to suffer, and therefore they don't have this, the safety net. They can truly plunge. And yeah, there's just a refreshing honesty there, and it complicates things. So when the Riddler is saying things like, oh, you and I are not so different, and there's always that conversation, the yin and yang in Batman for sure, it's like, okay, sure, I can believe that, but show me. And when I say show me, as in the script, show me. Force Batman to confront his morals where the stakes are really high in a way that is unexpected for the audience. That's just how you push. I would like to mention one other thing that I absolutely loved, and I found it to be so refreshing, and it is the score by the magnificent Michael Giacchino. It captured everything that I wish that the Hans Zimmer scores did for the Nolan films. In those scores, there's that angst and that brooding mood and that thudding monotony and a lot of, chaos and noise, but there's very little light and shade. There's almost no real compositional merit there. But this is what I have been waiting for. Giacchino is somebody, I think, who really does understand composition. If you listen to his scores in the past, he's somebody very inspired by people like, I think, Jerry Goldsmith as an example, or Alex North, Elmer Bernstein, even John Williams types. So there is a more robust finish and polish to his compositions, yet I think here he found a balance between that and finding that more minimalism. And I don't think of him as a minimalist composer, but I think it's because he has such rich, well-rounded sense of musical knowledge that it carries through here. There's dimension to the minimalism. There's diversity in the instrumentation, and it's not all on one level and one emotion. I just loved it. My favorite will probably always be the animated series Shirley Walker theme. I just love the minor key and everything, but this might be a close second. I honestly, I think I prefer it to the Danny Elfman, Tim Burton collaboration. But yeah, you know what? I liked the movie. I did, even though I have many issues with it. I liked it to the point where I felt like, oh, there's so much I want to change. So I consider that a good thing because I'm invested. Lots of good moments here and a lot of things that I would like to revisit for sure. And I'm actually excited for the next film. I just want, in the next film, I want the plot to be stronger and I want the stakes to be higher. And I think we can inch our way there. But yeah, certainly I recommend the movie for Batman fans and, just people in general. But yeah, that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I do commission portraits and I sell prints of my work. If that's something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I would like to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. If you're interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.